A Levite stood at the edge of the tabernacle and accused Moses and Aaron of self-exaltation. By nightfall, the earth would open. 250 leaders would burn. 14,700 more would die in a plague. This is the rebellion of Korah. But this was not a random uprising. It did not begin with desperation or chaos. It began with men who were already close to power, who understood exactly where the lines were drawn, and who had decided, with deliberate organizational intent, to challenge those lines in public. To understand what they were challenging, you have to understand what they were standing inside. Israel in the wilderness was arranged. The tabernacle sat at the center of the camp. Every tribe held an assigned position around it. The Levites formed the ring closest to the sanctuary, closer than any ordinary Israelite could stand. And from within the Levites, one clan was positioned closer still. The Kohathites carried the most sacred objects when the camp moved: the ark, the lampstand, the altars. By hand, on their shoulders, no carts, no distance, but there was a line even they could not cross. Aaron's sons covered every sacred object before the Kohathites came near. They were not permitted to touch what had not yet been wrapped. They were not permitted to see it uncovered. They carried the holiest objects in Israel and were barred from administering them. Picture what that meant in practice. Every time the cloud over the tabernacle lifted, the signal that the camp would move, the trumpet sounded, the tents came down, and Aaron's sons went to work first. When they covered the ark with the veil, wrapped the table, the lampstand, the altars in blue cloth and animal skins, and sealed every object before the Kohathites were allowed to approach. The Kohathites would arrive at objects already prepared by someone else's hands. They would lift them, carry them to the next camp, and set them down. Then Aaron's sons would unwrap them. The Kohathites never touched what was beneath the covering. They carried the weight without the access. Every march, every stop, every time the camp reassembled. That line was not tradition, it was appointment, fixed by a name, not his. Korah was not arguing from the outside. Every argument he made as someone who had spent years earning proximity to the center. Proximity that had never translated into the authority he believed it should. The gap between where he stood and where Aaron stood was not large in physical terms. It was total in institutional ones. And that kind of gap, when it is close enough to see clearly, tends not to produce resignation. And when men like that decide the line is illegitimate, they do not whisper. They gather leaders. From the south side of the camp, the firstborn tribe of Israel had been watching the priesthood it could never hold. Reuben was the firstborn son of Jacob. Firstborn meant inheritance, precedence, rule. Reuben had the name, but not the power. The camp placed Reuben on the south side of the tabernacle, adjacent to the sanctuary's entrance, close enough to watch Aaron cross the threshold they could not. No priestly office, no judicial authority, no governing role in the assembly, prominent and peripheral at the same time. The position was close, the authority was not. That gap did not shrink with time. That frustration did not disappear when the camp moved. It accumulated. Dathan and Abiram were Reubenites. When Korah came to them, he was not bringing a stranger's argument. He was offering a coalition to men who already had their own reasons to want the current arrangement gone. The Reubenite grievance was specific. Their tribe had the lineage, had the camp position closest to the sanctuary on the south, had the numbers, and had been passed over in every allocation of authority that mattered. When Korah framed the existing leadership as self-elevation rather than divine appointment, it was not an abstract theological claim to Dathan and Abiram. It was a description of something they had been watching from the south side of the tabernacle for years. Korah, son of Izhar, was a Kohathite, embedded near the center of the system, close to the ark, held at a precise institutional distance from the office that governed it. What made him dangerous was not anger. It was precision. He understood which argument could move 250 recognized leaders to act, and he built his case around it. He recruited Dathan and Abiram from Reuben, son of Peleth, also of Reuben, and 250 men the text describes as chiefs of the congregation, chosen from the assembly, well-known men, not outsiders, not the marginalized, the people who ran Israel. The number alone carries weight. 250 chiefs of the congregation is not a fringe movement. It represents a significant cross-section of recognized male leadership across the tribes of Israel. When that many well-known men move together, the camp notices. When they move together toward the entrance of the tabernacle with censers in their hands, the camp does not look away. Their charge, when they assembled against Moses and Aaron, was this: "You have gone too far, for all in the congregation are holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. Why then do you exalt yourselves above the assembly of the Lord?" The argument was precise. At Sinai, Israel had been told it would be a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. Korah's coalition took that language and turned it against the tiered system beneath it. If all were holy, then Aaron's exclusive access to the incense altar was not sacred appointment. It was self-elevation. The argument did not reject the covenant. It used the covenant to dismantle the structure built in its name. And it was the kind of argument that 250 recognized leaders could carry publicly without being immediately dismissed. Moses heard it and fell face down. When he rose, he did not answer with words. He proposed a test. But before the test, he sent for Dathan and Abiram, a summons, the act of the highest judicial authority in the camp, calling parties before him to be heard. They refused. They sent back a message the text records without softening. "We will not come up. Is it a small thing that you have brought us up out of a land flowing with milk and honey to kill us in the wilderness? And now you also want to lord it over us? You have not brought us into a land flowing with milk and honey, or given us an inheritance of fields and vineyards. We will not come up." The inversion was total. Egypt, where their fathers had built under forced labor, where a pharaoh had ordered the killing of their sons, was now the land of milk and honey. The wilderness, entered through the parted sea on the strength of a divine promise, had been recast as the place where Moses was slowly killing them. And Moses was now a prince who had delivered nothing and still demanded they appear before his court. They did not just refuse the summons. They dismantled the framework that made the summons meaningful. When a man refuses a summons and calls the one who sent it a tyrant, there is no procedural path left. What remained was the test. And Korah was not withdrawing. Moses had just been told to his face by 250 recognized leaders and the chiefs of Reuben that he had taken too much upon himself. The obvious response for a man protecting his position would have been force. Moses chose procedure. He handed the question to the sanctuary. Each man in Korah's company and Aaron would take a censer, fill it with incense, and present it before the Lord at the entrance of the tent of meeting the following morning. The one the Lord accepted would be shown to be his. Whatever happened at that entrance could not be reframed as Moses' decision. The morning came. Each man took his censer, put fire in it, laid incense on it, and stood at the entrance of the tent. 250 censers, 250 chiefs of the congregation, men whose names were recognized across the tribes of Israel, men who had been present in every assembly of the camp, each performing the act that Aaron alone was authorized to perform, are pressing to the exact threshold where the boundary of sacred access was drawn. They had not come in secret. They had come with their credentials in daylight in front of everyone. They held their censers and they waited. Then Korah assembled the whole congregation at the entrance against them. The test was no longer a controlled procedural moment. All of Israel was watching 250 of their recognized leaders hold censers at the threshold, watching Aaron hold his, watching the question of who held the right to draw near get stated in the plainest physical terms possible. The whole congregation was present to see which side the sanctuary answered. The glory of the Lord appeared to the whole congregation. Then the ground split open beneath the tents of Dathan and Abiram. The earth swallowed them, their households, on the men who belonged to Korah, all their property, and closed over them. They went down alive into Sheol. At the same moment, fire came out from the Lord and consumed the 250 men presenting incense at the entrance of the tent. All of it at once, the ground closing, the fire falling, the camp watching. At the sound of it, all Israel fled, fearing the earth would take them also. What followed in those moments after the earth closed and the fire went out was a kind of suspension. The camp had just watched something happen that had no precedent inside Israel's own history. The ground had opened beneath Israelite tents. Fire had come from the Lord and burned Israelite leaders at the sanctuary's entrance. Those were the facts. The camp fled because the facts were terrifying, and then it camped overnight with them. Nay, the bodies of the 250 remained near the tent, each still holding a bronze censer. Eleazar, son of Aaron, collected them. Every censer was hammered into plates and used to overlay the surface of the altar. The purpose was explicit, a sign that no outsider, no one outside Aaron's line, should ever come before the Lord to burn incense. The censers the 250 had carried to the tent as their claim to the priesthood became, after their deaths, the metal surface of the altar that every Israelite who approached it would face. Not a record stored away. A surface, visible on every approach, every offering. The men who had brought those censers to the threshold were gone, but what they had carried was fixed into the structure of the sanctuary itself, hammered flat against the altar, facing outward at the camp, facing south toward Reuben's tents, facing toward every future generation who would stand before it and not know, unless someone told them, what the metal was made of and who had held it last. The morning after, the congregation assembled against Moses and Aaron. Not a faction, not Korah's remaining supporters, the whole congregation. They said, "You have killed the people of the Lord." Consider what that required. They had watched the ground open and close. They had seen fire fall on 250 men at the entrance of the tent. They had fled the camp at the sound of it, fearing the earth would take them next. They had spent the night with all of that in their tents, the image of the ground splitting, the image of the fire, the count of the dead, the absence of 250 men who had been chiefs of the congregation the morning before. And by morning, when what they brought back to the entrance of the tent of meeting was not acknowledgment of what the test had produced, it was an accusation. Moses and Aaron had killed the Lord's people. The congregation did not fragment into those who believed the test and those who did not. It moved as one body, with one voice, back to the threshold where the ground had split and the fire had fallen, and it spoke the accusation together. As they gathered, the cloud covered the tent, and the glory of the Lord appeared. Moses and Aaron fell face down. Moses turned to Aaron. "Take your censer and put fire in it from the altar, and lay incense on it, and carry it quickly to the congregation, and make atonement for them. For wrath has gone out from the Lord. The plague has begun." Aaron did not walk. He ran. The plague had already started moving through the assembly by the time he reached them. Think about what he was running toward. The assembly that had assembled that morning to accuse him and Moses of killing the Lord's people was now dying in the middle of that same accusation. People were falling while standing at the entrance of the tent, in the middle of the crowd that had walked there together. Aaron ran into the center of that. He did not know where the boundary of the plague was. He ran to the place where the dying were, and stood between them and whoever was still standing, and he held the censer, and he held his position, and the plague stopped advancing at the point where Aaron stood. He put on the incense and stood between the dying and those not yet dead. He held his position. The plague stopped. On 14,700 dead from the plague, in addition to all who had died in the affair of Korah. The congregation that had walked to the tent that morning Calling the burned 250, the Lord's people had now added 14,700 of its own to the count beside those names. Aaron walked back to Moses at the entrance of the tent. The plague was over. What came next was not silence. The day after the plague, the Lord told Moses to collect one staff from the leader of each of the 12 tribes, each man's name on his own staff, and Aaron's name on the staff of Levi. All 12 placed inside the tent before the ark. Left overnight. When Moses entered the tent the following morning, Aaron's staff had budded, blossomed, borne ripe almonds. Dry wood through the complete cycle to ripe fruit in a single night. But the 11 other staffs were unchanged. Moses brought all 12 out and showed them to the Israelites. Each leader took back his own. Aaron's was returned to the tent, placed before the ark, to remain as a permanent sign against those who would rebel. 2 objects now answered the question Korah had raised. The bronze plates faced outward from the altar toward the camp. The budding rod faced inward toward the ark. Outside, the metal of failure. Inside, the wood of appointment. The question of who had the right to draw near had been answered from both directions, built into the structure of the tabernacle itself. The Kohathites continued to carry the sacred objects when the camp moved. The tribe of Reuben continued to camp on the south side of the tabernacle, adjacent to the sanctuary they could not enter, close enough to see the bronze overlay from across the camp. The clans whose recognized leaders had stood at the tent with censers now had no leaders. The Reubenite households of Dathan and Abiram were gone. The assembly that had named the dead as the Lord's people had buried 14,700 of its own and returned to its tents without a recorded word. The text does not say what the surviving Kohathites told one another about Korah. It does not say whether the men who had camped beside Dathan and Abiram believed, after the count was written down, that Moses had killed the Lord's people, or that the ground had judged them. Numbers 26 notes briefly that the sons of Korah did not die. They survived. Their names appear later in the Psalms. I'd attached to temple songs, compositions that would be performed in the sanctuary their father had tried to enter by force, in the presence of the altar whose surface had been made from the censers of the men he led to the entrance of the tent. They carried his name into the institution that had destroyed him. They sang at the altar he had been hammered into. There is no record of what Israel understood the budding rod to mean in the days that followed. There is no account of whether the men who had watched the test, survived the plague, and stood before the bronze overlay drew a firm line between the question Korah had raised and the answer the sanctuary had produced. The text tells us what happened. It does not tell us what the camp believed about what happened. Those are not the same thing, and the distance between them is where the story ends without resolution. The argument was not refuted, it was buried.